Hey, what's up? I'm here because I read Uprooted by Naomi Novik, and it was alright.
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
Before we get started, you should all check out my merch and subscribe to my second channel and, all that other stuff that I'm supposed to promote. Like, check out the descriptions of all my videos. It has stuff I'm supposed to promote. So, when I first started reading Uprooted, I was thinking that it was going to be some weird Russian fantasy romance, and that sounded really intriguing to me because Russian literature is known for being existential and, let's say, soul-crushing. Even stuff that isn't completely soul-crushing is still pretty depressing, and the moral of the story tends to be that everything sucks, life is terrible, you just gotta learn to live with it. Like, Metro 2033 is a pretty good example of this. Like, I love that book, it's really, really good, but that does seem to be the main moral of the story, is that, yeah, life just kinda sucks, and Uprooted is actually not that.
That's good.
It does have some elements of Slavic folklore in there, but it's not a Russian novel by any means. In fact, it's kind of hard to describe what Uprooted is because it has elements of a lot of different things in there. It has elements of adult fantasy, young adult fantasy, Slavic folklore, children's fairy tales, bad romance novels, and individually, I think all of those are fine, or hell, I think most of them are good actually individually. It's just that they don't always mesh well, and it creates a book that, while overall I did enjoy it, is just kind of a mess. Like, conceptually and tonally, it's all over the place. Because the central conflict of the story, as well as a lot of the smaller conflicts and a lot of the character interactions and just various things that happen throughout the book, are very adult. However, the central conflict, this very adult central conflict, is resolved in a very childlike way, and so the climax of the story and the resolution was very unsatisfying for me, and that did put a damper on the whole rest of the book. And that's the biggest example of that problem, but throughout the whole book there are a lot of smaller examples of the same thing. There will be a really adult moment or a really adult scene or just a dark character or something. It never goes into grimdark territory, just to be clear, but it is like just mature and adult, and then it's followed up by something weird and childlike, and I don't know, they just don't fit that well together. What's the story actually about? Well, it's about a main character girl who is a teenage girl. Her name is Agnieszka. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Look, it's a vaguely Polish name. Polish names are hard at the best of times, okay? I'm doing my best here.
Everybody got that?
And I'm describing her as main character girl, but she's not like a main character girl from all the crappy romantasy that people keep trying to get me to read. Don't worry about that. She gets taken as an apprentice to a wizard who is just called the Dragon, and the first chunk of the book is just her adjusting to her new life as the Dragon's apprentice. She is learning a bit about magic, but she also has to do a lot of chores and housekeeping around his wizard tower. And meanwhile, while this is happening, there are some magical woods, which is just called the Wood, and they are corrupting and attacking everything around them and slowly spreading. It's like the Wood is basically the evil force that appears in a lot of fantasy stories. Like, it's basically Mordor or the Blight from Wheel of Time. Agnieszka discovers that she has a whole lot of magical potential. She's the main character, so she has super special magic that other people don't totally understand. She decides to do heroic stuff, and from there, the story unfolds. When I first started this book, I was really, really not looking forward to it, because it is a fantasy novel told in first person, and the protagonist POV character is a teenage girl, and it's kind of a shame that forced me to believe, like, oh, this book is gonna be fucking shit, because there's just, like, so many crappy young adult fantasy and porn disguised as fantasy books out there that have that exact type of main character. So I was thinking to myself, like, oh, great. This is just gonna be constant descriptions of how horny she is. We're gonna hear about how hot every man she comes across is. We're gonna not get any real insight into her personality based on the narration other than the fact that she's horny. She's not going to have much of a personality. She's going to be the specialist, bestest person that the whole story revolves around, and she does all the cool magic power stuff, but at the same time, she's totally helpless. Like, that's what I was thinking it was going to be at first. And no, it's not that. Like, Uprooted came out around 10 years ago, which I think is before this trend really started to take over in fantasy. But no, I did realize maybe a third of the way through the book, halfway through the book, that Agnieszka and the rest of the book, like, it's not perfect, but it's not romantasy slop either.
That's good.
And it really is a shame that having a fantasy book with a teenage protagonist told in first-person POV is associated with so much crap, because that in and of itself, like, a book shouldn't be judged for that, and I'll admit I was doing that, but I was wrong. This does feel like a good time to mention that there is one sex scene in this book, but it's not super explicit. It doesn't go on that long. It's tastefully done, I think. It actually fits into the story. But again, like I said, parts of this book are pretty adult, including that, and I really wouldn't recommend that children read this, but at the same time, there's a lot of, like, childish stuff in there, so it just leads to this weird tonal clash. And as far as protagonists go, I think Agnieszka is fine. You know, she's a decent person. She actually does things and contributes to the story. She doesn't know everything, but she's not stupid either. Like, that's better than many protagonists. I don't have a whole lot to say about her. She's not extremely deep or complex or likable, but she works fine for this book. Like, from what I understand, this is a standalone novel, so it's not like she has to carry an entire long-ass series or anything. One of my biggest issues with this book, and it's a pet peeve of mine that I see semi-frequently, is that the world never really felt like it was there. You know, it just felt like a vaguely medieval world, and the culture is vaguely Slavic, and that's kind of all we had. Like, it does that thing that a lot of bad fantasy does, and even good fantasy does this too, to be fair, but I still don't like it. It does that thing where every country that they mention is a very clear parallel to a real-world country. Like, most of the book takes place in a kingdom called Polnia, it's just Poland, and it's right next door to a Russian XP, which is just called Rosia, and there's a province in Rosia called Kiva.
Ooh, that's bad.
Come on, you're not even trying at that point. Like, you could literally just change the names, and it wouldn't be great, but at least it would give off the impression that you were trying to make an actual fantasy world and not just copy-pasting the real world. And honestly, I'd be okay with authors taking, you know, just real-world countries, changing the name and maybe a few other things, and then just putting it in their story, if they actually went into depth with it, or they made it a little weird and a little bit different. Like, okay, this takes place in fantasy Poland. What if we just go into a lot of detail about real things about medieval Poland? Like, okay, I'm not super well versed in the history of that, but what if they went into a whole lot of detail about how their government works kind of weird, or they went into a lot of detail about some weird aspects of their culture, or some weird aspects of their religious practices, you know, things like that. And you could take real life weird stuff, or you could make up your own weird things, but if you just had one or two things like that and put it in there, it would make the entire world feel so much more real and so much more lived in, but we just don't have that. And on top of that, the magic isn't great either, because the magic, I don't know, a decent chunk of the book is about Agnieszka learning about how to use magic. She's learning from the wizard, the dragon, but we don't get enough details about how exactly the magic works and what you have to do in order to, you know, do anything with it. So it doesn't feel really earned when Agnieszka figures something out that's impressive, or does something that's impressive. You know, like, a good example of this sort of thing done well is Mistborn, right? And Mistborn obviously has a really hard magic system, and I don't think that's what this book was going for. It was definitely going for something softer. But if you want to show how your protagonist learns and grows and develops their magic powers, Mistborn is a great example of that, because Vin, the protagonist in that series, she gets her powers very early on, near the beginning of the story, and she starts learning to use them, and we, the audience, see her grow, and we see her learn, and we see her be better than other people a lot. And so when Vin, you know, figures out how to do something that no one else was able to do, or she defeats someone in a fight or something, it feels earned, because we were shown that she's really good at this. Whereas in Uprooted, it feels like we're being told that Agnieszka is really good with magic, but we don't really see how she's good with it. It's just she's good with it because the story says so. As far as villains go, there are a couple of minor human antagonists, but the overall antagonist, the overall threat, is the Wood. And I like the Wood as a threat. You know, it feels mysterious and creepy, and I don't have a whole lot else to say beyond that. You know, the way that everything is resolved is, again, very childish and weird, but the Wood is really mysterious and creepy for most of the book, and when we see more of what it can do, it gets worse. It gets even creepier, and I did like that. And I think the last, like, quarter of the book is the climax, really. Like, there's a big battle, and as far as sieges and battles go in fantasy novels, I think this one is fine. You know, it's not going to compare to Tarmon-Gai'don or anything like that, but it's still an enjoyable read. However, after the big final battle, the book does that thing that I keep seeing lately where the protagonist is brought to another world in some sort of magical fashion to have everything explained. Like, recently I read Quicksilver, and that book did the exact same thing. Like, after the final battle, main character girl just gets pulled away by a literal god so that he can tell her, hey, you're very special, let me explain the nature of our world to you, and it's just, I don't know, it's kind of odd. And Uprooted does the same thing, and that leads to the ultimate resolution, which, if this was written to be more like a children's fairy tale, the ultimate resolution, I think, would be fine, but in this, the tone clashes. Because for a lot of parts of this book, it is darker than I thought. Like I said earlier, it never goes into grimdark territory, not even close, but there's some stuff here that is pretty adult and definitely doesn't feel like it's out of a children's fairy tale. Like, for example, pretty early on, there is a person who attempts to sexually assault Agnieszka.
Ooh, that's bad.
It doesn't go very far, thankfully, but that does happen. There's also, again, one sex scene which is fairly R-rated. I wouldn't call it an X-rated scene. There's some books that are just full-on X-rated as far as sex scenes go, but the one in this is very R-rated. There's also just plenty of murder and scheming and political maneuvering and stuff, so this feels like a modern adult fantasy book in that regard, but then the resolution after the climax just does not feel that way at all. It's very, very strange, and it just felt like a letdown after everything that came before. But, you know, overall, I thought Uprooted was an enjoyable book. I liked it. You know, the characters were good. The story and the journey they go on was good. The world it takes place in is fine. You know, like I said, it's very, very shallow, but I don't think it's doing anything spectacularly bad. The only real issue that kept me from enjoying this book more than I otherwise would have is that the tone jumps around all over the place, and basically it just feels like it doesn't commit to anything, you know? Like, again, there's parts of it that feel like it's just reliving Slavic folklore, there's parts that feel like it's children's fairy tales, there's parts that kind of feel like a bad romance novel, but then there's parts that are like young adult fantasy, and then there's other parts that are like adult fantasy, and so these don't mix together that well. They just don't. So I think no matter what you're into, there will be parts of this book that either annoy or disappoint you no matter what. And so because of that, while I did enjoy Uprooted overall, it's hard to recommend. You know, I enjoyed it, but I don't know how to recommend it to people and say, yeah, you'll enjoy it if you like X, or you'll enjoy it if you like Y, or if you're looking for something like this, then check it out. I don't really know what to say in that regard. So, I don't know, just make of that what you will. I enjoyed Uprooted. I thought it was a good book that could have been great. You know, there's parts that detract from it. It could have been great if those weren't there, but overall, I liked Uprooted. So that's about all I have to say. Please like the video, comment, subscribe, follow me on socials, subscribe to my second channel. You know, I post stuff there that doesn't have much to do with books, just whatever I feel like doing. Lately, I've been interviewing other creators from around YouTube and around the internet, and that's about all. Have a lovely day. Goodbye. Hello there, friends. You watched this far. You know who I am. You see all these names here? These are the names of my patrons. My $10 and up patrons are Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin, Brother Santodes, Carolina Clay, Chibs Ahoy, Jace Spades, Lexi DeLorme, Lord Tiebreaker, Michael and Katie Hake, Mr. A5013, Proscriptions of Zhuojiang, Psych XS, Slumbering Jellyfish, Observing Outer Space, Tesla Shark, Toa Michael, Vevictus, and Wesley. Without these guys, I could not do what it is I do. If you want to get your name here, then consider donating to my Patreon. If you don't feel like doing that, you can also become a YouTube channel member, get access to exclusive videos once a month. You also get early access to all my regular videos. But if that doesn't appeal to you, or you just, for whatever reason, don't feel like doing it, like this video, comment on it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, share the video around, that helps immensely. You can also check out my merchandise store down below. I got t-shirts and stuff for sale. Buy them before, the tariffs completely render them unaffordable for everybody. Goodbye.